Good morning, frothers, and welcome back to Wheatlow Brewery. And we're all aware of the malt called Maris Otter, aren't we? But today we're going to revisit the grandfather of Maris Otter, the original hybrid malt invented in 1905 by Dr Edwin Beaven of Warminster. We're going to look into this malt, see what it's about, and try and brew a delicious frothing ale with it. So, what is Plumage Archer? Plumage Archer is the first hybrid barley variety invented in 1905 by Dr Beaven from Warminster. At this time, all barley used in Britain was what you call landrace varieties. This means that over the history of man, basically, farmers and interested parties have gathered up varieties of barley that they see growing locally to them, saved the seeds, planted them and grown them. And these kinds of barley, they are barley of course, originally for eating and later for brewing, but they're not reliable. They can genetically drift, they can be unreliable in certain conditions. They tend to grow well where you found them, but if you take some seeds to another county and different soil, topography, climate and so on, they tend to not do as well. And this was a problem in terms of consistency, yield and getting a reliable source of barley. So Dr Beaven understood this, and in 1905 he crossed two breeds of barley. One was Plumage, which I believe is from Denmark, and the other is Archer, which was a famous landrace commonly used in the UK at the time. And he called this new barley Plumage Archer, keeping the Archer in there for recognition. But he needn't have worried, particularly because this barley yielded 10% more. It had shorter stalks, so it was less prone to lodging, i.e. getting flattened by hail, wind, rain. And so farmers took up this variety immediately, and it thrived. A few years later, 1908, another variety was developed together with Guinness called Sprat Archer, Sprat being an Irish variety of malt. And the two of them, along with Chevalier, made up the vast majority of malt used in the UK up till the 40s, and then some other varieties started to come in. However, by the 60s, these varieties had been long overtaken by newer breeds of barley. Maris Otter, for example, is the grandson or granddaughter of Plumage Archer. Newer varieties would tend to give you better agronomics. In other words, it was more viable for the farmer. So if the stalks were shorter, they'd be less prone to lodging, getting flattened. If the yield was higher, there'd be more tons per acre. If they were more resistant to disease, such as powdery mildew, then again you'd get better yields and less spoilt crops and fewer disasters on the farm. So farmers would drift towards modern hybrids that would give them all these things that they wanted in terms of consistent income off their crops. And Plumage Archer all but disappeared. However, there was in the John Innes Centre, there's all sorts of seeds stored in their vault there, and in 2018 Plumage Archer returned to the UK market, being marketed as a heritage malt. Nowadays there's more interest from both distillers and brewers in using some interesting malts that give subtle but profound differences to the beer or the spirits, the whiskey and so on. So I think you can get Plumage Archer from Crisp, but certainly you can get it from Warminster Maltings, and that's where the malt we've got today is from. When we went around Warminster, if you've seen the episode on that, you'll see that this is a magnificent malting place. Everything is floor-malted, which is the old-fashioned way. Basically, you wet the grain, you spread it on a floor, and then you turn it by hand with tools like malting rakes every day or every few hours to allow the temperature to be kept in check as it warms up whilst it's germinating, and to enable oxygenation of the seed. And this enables the maltsters, being very hands-on, to keep an eye on the seed and stop the process at the exact right stage. And sometimes that might take 2-3 days, sometimes it might take 4 or 5. And that hands-on thing and small batches is what makes floor-malted malts superior in the eyes of many brewers, because it's got that little bit more, that less generic flavour and that little bit more individual monitoring of the modification of the malt. So I've got myself a sack of Plumage Archer malt from Warminster Maltings, floor malted of course, and I'm going to try and do that justice by brewing a beer. And I'm going to go for a golden ale, British golden ale. And British golden ale is a style that emerged in the 80s, early 90s, and it was originally designed as a way for a British real ale brewery to sort of fight back a little bit on the quite frightening at the time rise of lager drinking in the UK. So early exponents of this style were things like Summer Lightning and Exmoor Gold, and basically we're talking about an ale. It's golden, it's 4 to 5%, and it's going to be reasonably well hopped of about say 30 IBUs, say 25 to 35 IBUs, something like that. And it's going to be usually English hops. It's not normally going to have a dry hop, and fairly simple malt bill, usually either single malt or very slight additions to it. So it's roughly along those lines. But I mean, actually the point of today isn't a genius, innovative recipe. We're going to keep it quite simple. The point of today is, can we get the malt to shine through? Speaking of which, what does it taste like? Right, well, so if you read the description of Plumage Archer, you're talking about breadiness, a honey taste, sweetness is often mentioned, and also very light notes of fruit, namely apricot and pear, which may come through to the final beer. It should be quite a bold flavour of malt, should come through on its own if you like. And today's malt bill is 100% Plumage Archer, nothing else. I'm going to mash it at 65.5, just a little bit lower than my standard 66.5. just to try and dry out that sweetness a little tiny bit. And I'm going to hop it with English hops, namely EKG and Challenger. So at the start of the boil, we're going to have 14.2 IBUs of Challenger, 9.4 IBUs of EKG, and then we're going to stick some in at the end, last 10 minutes, 7.7 IBUs of Challenger and 5.1 IBUs of East Kent Goldings. For your water profile, I'm going for a roughly 2:1 sulfate to chloride ratio. I'll put it on the screen here, just to keep it in line with a traditional golden ale where you're emphasising a little bit of the hoppiness. And so yeah, pretty straightforward. I'm going to ferment it with Fountain Bridge yeast because that's neither too fruity nor too clean like a USA5. It's just down the middle, very fast and reliable as well, and we should have a good strong fermentation from that. So really excited to see what this beer turns out like and to taste this malt. In fact, we could have a taste now really, couldn't we? Since it's already mashing in. So it's in the mash now, and that should give us a good idea of the flavour. It is hard to, it's hard to judge a malt by its flavour on its own, I think, because it's just overwhelmingly sweet, isn't it, before it's got any hops or had any fermentation. But I can get a bit of the honey. I don't know if I can get the apricot or pears, to be honest, at this stage, but we'll see. Just try and get the maximum out of the malt. I was tempted to just do a decoction on it, but it's not to the style of beer we're doing. It's not to the necessary for this malt. In fact, we have relatively good extraction, even though this is an old variety apparently. So I've decided not to do that. We'll leave that for a more suitable style. But I think one day I'd like to just do a decoction on a nice ale using something like Maris Otter or Plumage Archer or Chevalier to just see if we can just enhance the flavours from that malt. So I might do that in a future video. So I'm about to turn the temperature up for the mash out, and then we can carry on with this super brew day. Oh, super. Right, hops. I've got the Challenger already weighed out, and I need some East Kent Goldings for this one. I've adjusted them for the alphas to get to where the recipe was. Super. Right, so those three for the end. And these two can go in now, so let's go and put them in. This is the wort in the kettle. It's very pale, isn't it? I wasn't expecting it to be quite that pale. Still, maybe it'll darken up a bit in the boil. yeast. Going for Fountain Bridge on this one. Fountain Bridge is a Scottish ale or an Edinburgh yeast. I think it's Yeast 1728 is the equivalent, and is it WLPO 28? I think something like that. Are Scottish yeasts, and it's quite a fast fermenting, and it can give you some fruity notes, and it can be a bit clean as well, depending really on the malt bill. It seems to bring out the fruity stuff on the darker malts. On this beer, I expect that it's going to be quite clean, also fast and efficient, so this will be ideal. I'm going to get 100 grams in, which is about 0.7 grams per litre, halfway up the scale of 0.5 to 1 gram per litre. Right, so there we are, that is 100 grams. So let's go and put it in. So I'm going to set the spund into no pressure, unscrew it as far as it'll go, and then just so it comes off, and then just screw it off and turn back on, and we'll get this into position, get the liddies on. And crucially, because it's literally 30 degrees, we'll get the cooling on it as well. Super. Right, Plumage Archer's ready. It's looking good, and I'm going to put it in some 9-gallon casks, and I'm going to fill at least a keg, maybe a keg and a half as well, so I can can a bit and hopefully send it down to Robin at Warminster Maltings. So I've just filled that cask. This keg is full of, it's clean and it's full of CO2. So I'm not going to be as careful as a normal beer, but it is full of CO2. So I'm just going to take the lid off and gravity feed it with this, which will be nice and fast. And then I'll leave that a couple of days to settle, and we can keg it. It's actually looking reasonably clear now. Add some finings to this keg as well. 14 ml of Super F, which is a silicon finings. So that should give it nice and bright, although we might get, when you use these silicon finings, sometimes you do get that much kind of fluffy bottom. And when you're drawing from the bottom, as you do with a keg, that can make you think the beer hasn't cleared yet. But normally, after 2 or 3 pints, it pulls through nice and clear. So if you were really patient, you could not put the finings in at all, and you could wait for it all to clear, and then you'd have it all with a more compact bottom. Must look that word up, patience. Right, it's getting a bit fuller now. I don't want it too full. I don't want the air in tube actually in the liquid, so I'm going to leave a gap like that at the top. Here's what it's looking like. It's not clear, but it's trying to clear. It's a little bit cold, but taste-wise, it just tastes like a really balanced golden ale, really, so far. A little bit of bitterness, a little bit of malty sweetness. It's not heavy on the body. Perhaps could have done with some other malts if you're really going to make an amazing beer, but with just a smash beer, it's actually quite light. Anyway, we'll taste it properly later, but it's tasting pretty good anyway. Quite pleased with that. Super. So I'll fill this other 9 and then we'll put them in the cellar, and then we'll do some canning later from that keg. And a lot of people do ask me about priming the cask. So do I leave any gravity, any unfermented gravity, say a couple of points? Do I add any priming sugar to the cask? And the answer is no, I don't do either of those things. Experience has taught me over the years that a cask ale doesn't need priming. It'll get enough condition from its own residual sugars. So the act of actually racking it into a cask, which obviously will get some oxygen ingress and will agitate the beer a little bit, will just kick the yeast off enough to get it going and do that little bit of conditioning in the cask. So no priming sugar in my case, no left condition in the beer. So this beer has been at the final gravity for perhaps 2 or 3 days. I've cooled it down. It's reasonably cool now, about 7 or 8 degrees centigrade. And I do put finings in the cask, silicon finings, Super F in this particular case today. So I'm just going to seal that up now. And I'm going to leave it actually outside in the middle of the brewery. The temperature in here today is about 17, 18 degrees, something like that. It might go up to 20. So leave it for a day or so in here just to condition. Or you can put it straight in the cellar and it'll still condition there. But by leaving it for a day in here, it'll be pretty much conditioned within that day, and it will drop bright. And a beer like this, which is 3.94% golden ale, not complicated, will probably be ready to drink in just a few days, literally 3 days. It should be really bright. In a week it'll be beautiful. And then what you find is if you open one that's 2 months old, then it will have quite a lot of condition in the cask and it'll squirt quite a bit. So what you don't want with casks is them by priming them, by leaving unfermented gravity in there, is you don't want them getting so much condition that the bungs pop out and beer slops everywhere where you don't want it to, and things like that. So that's how I do it. Most of the cask breweries that I've been around don't do any priming or left condition in the beer. 1 or 2 do. A notable one was Harvey's. They do prime the casks, but remember, they're not usually, customers down there are not usually using a sparkler, so perhaps having a little bit more condition just suits that beer. A lot of gravity pours, a lot of pump pours without a sparkler, and it'll still get a good head. I suppose if it's got slightly lower condition, it might not present quite as well in that particular case. Most brewers that I've come across don't do any kind of priming in the casks. It's not to say it's wrong, of course. Where occasionally you might want to do some priming in the cask might be if you've gone away, you've left it in the tank for a week, it's really fermented out after fermentation, and you might think it's never going to get any more condition. That might be a case to put a little bit in, probably, I don't know, 30 grams of sugar per 20 litres, something like that. Or the other one might be if you don't think that it's in very good condition, whether you think it's got too much air in it or whether it doesn't smell great or whatever. Sometimes a bit of priming sugar can clean up the beer in the cask and can actually reverse some aging processes that may have taken place. So those are the 2 occasions where I might occasionally use a priming sugar. And if I do any priming, what I would do is I would get a sensible amount of water. For example, if I had 3 casks, I might get 90 ml, so it's easily divisible by 3. And then I'd put, say, 30 grams of sugar per 20 litres in there, dissolve it, boil it so it's sterile, stick it in just at the casking process time, beginning, end, doesn't matter, and seal it up. And then you can leave it in a warm area like this for a day if you want to, or just stick it straight in the cellar. It'll still ferment at 12 degrees, it'll just be a bit slower. I've got here a pint of Barley is not widgets, and must say it's turned out absolutely beautiful, pale golden straw colour with a lovely creamy head. Been poured actually a while and that head's still sticking around nicely, and looks a nice looking beer, so pleased with that. It did turn out a little bit on the weak side, didn't quite attenuate as much as I'd hoped, and because I think perhaps this kind of an old-fashioned malt probably could have done with a longer mash. 90 minute instead of 60 minute probably would have improved it, or improved the attenuation. But it is said to be a sweet malt, a malt that gives a slightly sweeter beer, so it probably always has a little bit of extra final gravity. But it looks lovely and clear, smells amazing. And on cask, it's absolutely delicious, so smooth. It's a simple beer, remember, so it's 100% Plumage Archer malt, and that malt gives you a little bit of graininess, almost some kind of mint thing going on there, but probably more likely the hops than the grain. It's very subtle, but I think it's there, and it's also got a kind of honey sweetness to it as well, which is what we'd expect from this kind of a malt. I think it's quite interesting. It's a little bit different actually to any other single malt, single hop I've ever done before. Although of course it isn't a single hop, 2 hops in this Challenger and EKG. And if you remember, I went for quite a high level of bitterness on this one, and that was because I expected to have a bit of sweetness from the base malt. So this is quite bitter, and actually that works really well with the sweetness from the base malt. It kind of works hand in hand, balancing it out. So very pleased with that actually as well. So in the finished beer is quite light. It's creamy head, it's golden, it's drinkable, it's about 3.7 I think it was in the end, so a little bit weaker than I perhaps hoped, aiming for about 4%, but that doesn't really matter because the body is reasonably good in it, perhaps because of that higher finishing gravity. And yeah, really interesting to use this heritage malt. It's great that Warminster and others are getting it produced by farmers again, because I think it did nearly disappear, so that's fantastic. And I have canned some up actually, and there's my badge, look, with Robin Apple on, saying Barley is not widgets. And if you don't know what that refers to, then take a look at our tour of Warminster Maltings video, where Robin explains how you can't treat all barley the same because it's not widgets. It's got the individual effects of the terroir from the different fields and conditions and so on that it grows in. And by doing small batches at Warminster and turning them by hand and so on, they can really adjust the malting process and dial in to what that particular batch of barley requires. So I thought that was an interesting quote from him. Barley is not widgets, so why not name the beer after him in his honour. So the other day actually I did send him a few cans of this down as a bit of a thank you for showing us round, so hopefully he's received them, and hopefully he'll enjoy the taste of this, and nice to taste a malt like Plumage Archer in a single form to really see what it brings to the beer. Whilst the bitterness is a bit robust from the relatively high level of hopping, of course the hops themselves are not strongly flavoured. They've got the sort of hedgerowy subtlety of an English hop. You can probably get a little bit of sort of marmaladiness from it, a little bit of hedgerow. I think I've got that bit of mint from it. No doubt somebody better than me could taste a whole list of other things, but as you can see, it's going down really well. Really pleased with the beer. So I think I'll finish this one, go and grab another. Remember to give us a thumbs up, leave us a comment, tell us what you think of this beer, what you think of Plumage Archer. Have you ever tried it? Will you try it? Check out Warminster Maltings when you're next ordering malt, because I've got no particular reason to say that in terms of them sponsoring us or anything, which we don't have anything like that. But just the very quality of Warminster doing small batches, proper floor maltings, old-fashioned way of doing it, just individual people monitoring the barley by eye, by touch, by feel, and doing it properly like the old days gives you a certain depth of flavour and character, I think, that you don't get in other malts. So get yourself a bit of Warminster Maltings. I've certainly enjoyed using it. In fact, I've ordered a couple more different bags as well, so I can keep trying it in some different beers. So leave us a comment, give us a thumbs up, and we'll see you next week for another frothing ale. Cheers.